are, taking some of these these culture totems that Russell talked about, and they're turning them into like, oh, these are upper middle class things. Like, no, 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 this is what professional class people do. Like, it's two different entities. You can cross over into both worlds, but I guarantee you that, like, and I'm sure you know this, most upper middle class people don't pride themselves on reading the Atlantic. If you have the, like, yeah, I don't remember the last, like, even I think Fussell said this, and it's true. It's like, you think about some of these guys, these like prominent titans of industry, and what is the last book they read? It was some like random book on management, or it was like a Tom Clancy novel sitting on the shelf of their beach house. It wasn't they're not like sitting there like reading all the latest books trying to be a culture vulture, because they are above that. Like, they do not have the time for that. And that kind of, I don't know, you could call it parochialism, and I do sometimes. Like, that's kind of what, the upper middle class, I think, is defined by, more so than some of these like, wacko,
right,
God, like cultural items that people ascribe to it.
And I grew up upper middle class in Baltimore, suburbs of Baltimore, really. And, I went to a private school there, and, it was not the most like elite of elite private schools. It was a more affordable private school. So we did have a nice mix of people that went there. It wasn't all super elitist kind of upper class people. There were schools in the area
like
that
you
were,
usually get that. Yeah. Like when it's, yeah, you do. Yeah.
And I remember I used to be embarrassed that like when I had friends come over to my house, they'd always be commenting, "Oh, your house is huge, but oh, I had a friend that used to joke when he'd come over, he'd be like, "Oh, what's it like being in the top 1%?" And I used to be like, kind of like, I used to be like, very like, "Oh, I'm not like, I'm not like, I'm not now, like my own income is not, but like I was raised
No,
in a,
like
yeah.
you're coming at me like I can like see your like boxes back there, and
Right.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
we're
And,
both like, yeah, no.
but I
Coming from
grew
the
up in it.
basement.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's my point. I think that like a lot of people, like, we're starting to kind of, reverse. Like, I think American upward mobility is stalled, and that's, we've always had a class system like Britain's. I think, like, my belief is that we always have, in like certain ways, is a little bit more, scattered, and like not one person can belong, like people belong to like two different classes at once. But I think, you're going to start seeing that more. Like, it doesn't matter if someone is living in absolute filth. And this is what I think people are trying to get at with like generational wealth, or, accusing some of these sad journalists at like HuffPost or like BuzzFeed, where it's like, oh my God, like, like you're a child of privilege. It's like, well, they're not living that life now, but maybe
Right.
they were raised in a comfortable environment, not even like a super privileged one. But I think that like people are trying to kind of make that connect, where it's like, okay, like, well, if they have all these connections, or like they have all these advantages, and like, why are they making shit salaries?
Right.
And like they're about to be let go next week. Like, what's going on? People just don't really understand like how the industry works. And I think, there are a lot of, it's harder and easier for people of different classes to come into media, to come into the literary world. Like, it's easier in that there are more opportunities to get grants and scholarships. And I think lots of places want to hear more diverse voices. Like, everyone's looking for that. But then it's also harder in that, just a little, I think back, and I was one of the only people I knew who had a paid internship at the time. Like, when I got my first internship, the big five still weren't paying their people.
Right.
Like, everyone I knew who was working or like interning for HarperCollins or Simon & Schuster, like they were being paid in college credit. A lot of the people whose parents like couldn't afford to like put them up in New York, or didn't have some sort of arrangement. One of my friends went to her college's like financial aid office, and they gave her a rent stipend. She managed to kind of like find something that fitted, but I forgot what the number was. I was like, oh my God, how are you going to make that work?
Right.
Like, she had no choice but to make that work. But I was like, that's it for 3 months, where like I don't even think you can find a sublet. Like, she did, and like it completely worked out. I think she might have even like petitioned to get more money, but there's more and more opportunities and openings than ever, and like there's almost like a quasi affirmative action where you like leapfrog over everyone else, but then you have to actually do it. You actually have to like get to where you are. You have to like put out, like, walk the walk. You have to not have culture shock. There are barriers. Like, I don't disagree.
Right.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
this, what I see from a lot of people, and I agree, most people didn't have an opportunity to see this growing up. There's the conflation where they think that even people that are in the upper middle class are just like trust funds. Like they're conflating all the wealth that are like, because they mingle with people that do have this kind of intergenerational wealth and stuff, like they think that everybody there is just a trust fund. It's like, well, no, like this one journalist that works for, Huffington Post or whatever. Yeah, they grew up great because their parents made, 6 figures or whatever, but that doesn't mean they have a trust fund that they're living off of. They just had a great childhood and now they're making $35K a year. It's not like they're getting money every month to live. It's like,
also, not to mention, like sometimes I read or I see discourse and I'm like, I don't think you grew up in grinding poverty. Like they'll look at someone who had they'll look at someone who had like not even like what I like a middle class upbringing with like 2 parents that were there, which is a great privilege, and like they went to great public schools, which I think is a great privilege. And these people are like, oh my god, like you're an elite, and it's like, no, this person's an aspirant elite. Maybe that's why you find them so annoying, but they the system actually did work for them. Like they went to great public schools, like they worked hard, they got the career they wanted. I think people forget, like most people actually choose to be in this industry. They didn't just like stumble into it. Like there's a lot of ways, like it kind of self-selects, and you have to be completely insane to want to stay in it after a while. So in a way, it's like, yeah, they chose this. It wasn't like, oh, I just got this job because I couldn't get anything else. So I forgot where I was going with that.
That's your book, Sam. That's your book right there.
It's not an original insight. It's really not.
Yeah, but you are listening, listeners, to Heavy Board Presents JerkShop. We've been chatting already, but I'm joined again by Sam, coming in here, freelance editor extraordinaire. And we're having a little bit different workshop talk this time. It's not going to be focused just on creative writing, although we will be touching on that, listeners. Sam has a much broader experience with this too, as a professional editor, interning at some of these publishing houses in college and grad school and all of that. So I'm actually really excited to get your perspective on this, Sam. Thanks a lot for coming.
No, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be back.
Of course. I always start this off, just give me a little bit of your background with the writing industry, publishing, editing, and I know you even have MFA experience here. Just give us background for the listeners, as detailed or as vague as you want with.
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, there's really not much to tell, just that I studied both anthropology and literature, and I spent some time in writing workshops during undergrad. And then later I had very little MFA experience, left, pieced out, and started editing. I started doing freelance work for Breaking Media. I bounced around. I took work at other places. Then I got a job doing editorial for a bigger magazine company, a legacy one. And now I'm back to doing freelance. And there's a lot of my clients now, like kind of when they became independent, or they went independent after 2020, or they started kind of doing their own businesses or their own management in 2021. So basically I think my experiences are going to be a little bit different because I focus more on editing, which is a privilege. And I think a lot about my own writing. Like, has it deteriorated since I don't have much time to work on it anymore? Like, since I've been putting out news items more than I've been putting out literary pieces.
Yeah, and that's for the listeners too. That you are more of a nonfiction editor. You say is your expertise in that realm.
Yes.
But you have some experience with editing fiction and working on some of those presses. Like you said, you've interned in the past.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yes. But now it's mainly political and cultural copy, and it's all nonfiction.
How is the freelance market for nonfiction editing going right now? I mean, we don't have to get no numbers or anything. You don't have to tell us anything, but just like, how is that going? Is it rougher than it was? Is it better? Is it manageable?
This is what I'd say. I'd say that if you're open to reading different kinds of copy, if you're someone who can stomach kind of, reading controversial subjects, then there's a wealth of opportunity for you there. A lot of what I stumbled into, or like was lucky to kind of start working on in 2021, there's plenty of that now. I think in the past it was a lot harder, but if you talk to certain people, or if you are able, if you want to read about just any subject, and that's political nonfiction or that's tech and culture, like there are plenty of opportunities for you there. I'd say it's a lot harder to get started, but like once you do, they're just like you have the pick of the litter basically.
Yeah, I was curious because I've noticed through just searching the job boards and things, uh, there's more static content and there's more what they call static in marketing and stuff. But there's just more of
Yeah.
it all over the web than ever. And so like, well, they need editors for that. Like even if they're doing the chat GPT, they still need freelance editors. And the trend is they're not hiring full-time editors. They want to
You're
only
right.
freelance or contract you for 6 months or whatever it is. So I think, yeah, there is, if you want to go that route, listeners, there is a lot of opportunity there. But like Sam was saying, it's rough to get started. You got to put that work in to get
It's
started and then build the reputation and a client list and get recommendations. And a lot of it's word of mouth now too, just,
I was about to say, I think I owe a lot of my success to word of mouth. It's so hard to advertise, and I think I now. I mean, I'm lucky enough to have a sim. I wouldn't even say I have a reputation. I don't. I'm nobody, but I think people know that I appreciate free thought, and that I will try to polish and burnish your copy without toning it down. I will try and like keep the spice level intact. So like I think that that has helped me a little bit, that I'm not going to shy away or like try to like report your copy to somebody or like get you blacklisted from any outlet. Like I'm I think I am on your side, I'm on your team. But I also think what you were just saying about all those companies and like static content being produced by chat gpt, they're not hiring editors. They're just letting the AI spit out whatever copy, and they're not editing it.
oh, yes.
So, I mean, I would hope that they maybe like wake up and they're like, oh gosh, we need somebody to apply their own special style or, clean this up a bit. But at the moment, not really. And I think that's kind of what's going on in book publishing too.
Right.
A lot of people are saying that unless it's maybe like a certain kind of fiction genre, basically a lot of editors try to be hands off now. Like they don't even fight you on copy. They don't try to like, curb your worst impulses. They just, it's like, are you writing complete sentences? Yes. Okay. Like
Yeah, that's and
yeah.
I'm curious about this question only because it's like I've noticed this, especially when I was working in marketing, where I was, most English degree holders have to do this post graduation, and like you're
Yes.
writing the bullshit you don't care about, but like I, with the internet, with editing on screens, with the amount of content and the way that the kind of SEO forces people to have more and more content at all times to hit the
Yes.
search keywords, and it's just there's more errors, there's more grammatical errors, there's more in fragments, there's more everything in there, and it isn't like a
Always.
stylistic fragment either, it's like clearly an error. Like, yeah, like uh I speculate that it's about everything's on screen, because like even when I was working in marketing and stuff and they were doing the editing, it was all on screens. And when you're editing on a
Yeah.
screen, like you just easily go past the comma splices, you easily go past like all the kind of the stuff you only see if you're one of those people that know about it, if you've been trained into like editing and writing and have to pay attention to all that. But yeah, you do.
I
I,
think
I
it's
gloss
also the
over it.
software.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
I think it's also the software. Like I actually just encountered this today. I was editing a client's copy, and right before they sent the copy was printed, someone's like, "Oh my gosh! Like there are all these things that were not corrected." I was like, "Well, that wasn't on me." It turns out that sometimes with Google Docs, like when you're going through and you're doing track changes or you're marking up, it's not easy to keep track of all those corrections. Like you'll accept all the edits and then go, like I think a lot of authors do, and then go back and like fix or take suggestions or like, okay, step that. This That's what happened, today. I added a comma and then it got deleted, or like there was like one like entire paragraph I cut that somehow was added back in because of just, Google Docs going through different groups of people where it's like I pass it on to one group or like one person and then they pass it on to another. And then by the time that it's printed, it's like a game of telephone.
Right.
So it is kind of like the old-fashioned manuscripts that you steal into an envelope and send out because, everyone's harried, everyone's trying to get things done before deadline. This is something that a lot of people should have mastered, but it's different when a lot of people are remote or when like there are different levels of experience, you're all coming together to do this. And yeah, it's kind of embarrassing sometimes, you see this and it's like, what happened there? Like, what's going on? So I think when people are like, why doesn't this website have clean copy? Sometimes I think like there's no excuse, but then I think about the chain that it goes through now, or, the use of Google Docs where there are like 5 different people in the document with you.
If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, JerkShop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard. Yeah, and Google Docs doesn't track changes as well as some of the other word processors.
Yeah.
And even Microsoft kind of sucks at that, but I've noticed that too when I've published, especially, I'm not publishing in big publications. I'm publishing on friends' Substacks. I'm publishing on a few people that have asked me to write things for their Substack, which I've been dragging my feet on, but I'll promise I'll get it to you.
Gotta do it. Yeah.
And things like that. And then just local papers. I publish sometimes in a local paper here. It's internet, online, called the Nevada Independent. And they... it's all on Google Docs. Everything's on Google Docs. And you have 4 or 5 people kind of going in, including me. I have to approve the edits and changes. And they're usually always making you better, but it is confusing. And there's a lot of different emails going back and forth because it's cheaper to do it on Google Docs than to have a software. Yeah. Everybody has to have Microsoft subscriptions. Now you can't even just buy Microsoft Word. You have to subscribe to it monthly or yearly.
Yep.
And even when I'm working on a longer novel right now, and I'm rewriting it, I'm almost done it. And I've noticed that the Microsoft Word keeps glitching, particularly when the document gets, 300, 400, 500 pages when you're doing this. And it's like, it starts to give me like error misspellings on like stupid words like the or that aren't misspelled. I can see it. And I'm just like, so the software is glitching. Like, isn't this supposed to be the best? Like, like,
right. No, it's true.
The tech is letting us down.
Like, sometimes certain magazines use InCopy, which I've liked. Like, I've had success with InCopy, but I think, what we were just saying, where like Google Docs is like a lot of these places, like that's all you even see it in bigger corporations. Like everyone wants to use Google Docs now because, like you said, it's not just that it's free, it's efficient. Like people can just like jump into the document, like there's no limit. And, it's great in many ways, but then, it's also what happens is stuff like today where, you have all these people who are working very hard on some copy and then it just doesn't look like it in the end because things get lost.
Right. Yeah. And they get miscommunicated too. And then, yeah. And then a huge error after you spend all this time copy editing. Well, now a huge error gets through when you go to print or whatever, because of just somebody, it just got added back in, whatever it is. But yeah. And you have a unique MFA experience, I'll say here, but I think it's a very common one, Sam. Like, do you tell listeners a little bit about your MFA experience?
So I wouldn't say it's super common, but I'll say that some of the people who came out of that, and they were already in writing programs in undergrad, they did kind of become stars of the new DIY lit scene. Like I'm seeing names that I remember, and sometimes it's kind of nice to see them. Like I'm very happy to see them. But then also, I think what was going on, like when I was doing it, I finished undergradly, and I think while I was finishing undergrad, also like this is when I had the chance to start taking some MFA courses, and I was able to kind of keep going from there, which was a privilege. Like most people had to apply into the program, and I was able to just kind of skip all that because of the way our system worked. Yeah.
And that was at the college you were already doing undergrad with?
Yeah. Oh yeah, I was able to just kind of like jump to the grad program. So
Right.
at that point, so it was very odd because you would expect more from some of these people. It was a pretty selective program, but when you went around the room, you had like again, like you had some undergrads in there who were taking grad courses, and then you also had like you had people who were able to take like kids like you usually don't see like adult learners or like adult community people in there, but sometimes they joined us. And it made for a diverse and kind of fun workshop, but it also meant that workshop culture was different and that a lot of the rules of workshop were not followed. It also seemed that a lot of people were not. I was very surprised, I guess, by the way that people took criticism and then what they expected workshop to be. It disappointed me in a lot of ways. I'm not sure if the way that it disappointed me was, and other people had the same disappointments or the same expectations.
Do you mean that they were just like not serious about it, or they were like not taking the criticism? They were like getting defensive, or they were
I
lashing
think,
out?
okay, so I think that there was, I think a lot of like my instructors and a few of us, we really wanted to use the period to work. Like
Yeah.
everyone wants honest feedback on their writing. That's just how it goes. But then there were a lot of people and who, yeah, it wasn't even just that they wouldn't take criticism. They were absolutely triggered by criticism. And, those like I remember being pulled over, like me and a couple other people, where it's like, maybe don't be so harsh on so and so, or like, not even like giving so and so or giving so and so context, like, oh, maybe so and so is working full time, doesn't have time to devote himself to writing, or maybe so and so is dealing with family stuff. It's just like, oh, like you're being a little too harsh, and it's like, well, what if it's true? And we weren't being rude either. It was always
Right.
just critiques that you would expect if you were a writer.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I think the other thing is, I feel, or I always thought, there is a culture around workshop, which is you don't talk about workshop outside of workshop. Like everything kind of just stays like it's the best thing that you can do, like to honor your commitment, which is why I'm trying to kind of like keep this very vague and I'm like not saying much because I still believe in that. Like I do. But I think a lot of people, went a different route. They didn't know workshop etiquette, except for maybe don't criticize this person because like God knows why. Like because they're a special identity maybe, or because like they have certain circumstances. But that was the only kind of bit of workshop etiquette that I really remember being followed. People would go and like talk shit about people in workshop afterwards. Nobody, usually like I think in like different MFA programs, these are the people that you see all the time. Like your cohort well, you see all the. This is a little different because like I said, I like you had undergrads in there, you had some people who like just joined the community for certain seminars, not always.
Right.
So, and then also, I mean, like a lot of people, kind of, this wasn't a commuter school, but it was very close to New York. So a lot of people lived in the city and would just kind of like come on up. So it wasn't like, maybe your program or one of these high res programs that are in more rural settings. A lot of people were spread out
Right.
and people commuted. It wasn't like, say, you're at Roanoke College and then everyone just like goes to like a one housing development where everybody lives, and or
Right.
you go to the bar and you see people there, or you go to the coffee shop and people are working on their pieces and like workshopping each other outside of work. Like you just didn't see any of that.
Yeah, and there is. We've talked about it a little bit on this. Some other writers have brought it up, and it's like that kind of there is an etiquette. Like there is like a set of rules to how you would. And I think a lot of that is a good thing. And I do want to get your takes on the etiquette. Yeah, with just how you present the criticisms and the critiques. I think that's very important, how you present them. So like if you have somebody who's being very rude about it, or is just straight up, oh, it sucks, it's boring,
Mm-hmm.
those are just words that you want to stay away from when you're critiquing a piece, and seriously doing it too. Like and I think how you frame it too, like, and then just the level of people's effort around the room there is always kind of frustrating when you're it's everybody's individual effort. So one person could be a great reader and always be giving you good feedback, and then somebody who's just not making an effort at all, barely reading it before the workshop or whatever, that just something you have to deal with. But I think the etiquette itself, like What do you mean by etiquette? Maybe let's say for listeners out there, workshop etiquette or.
So I'd say that the one rule that we followed that was workshop etiquette was to be very gentle with criticism, but not in the way that you were describing. Remember, this was about like 2016, 2017. So things were a little bit, tensions were high. Politics was suddenly in the workshop. And I think you had to take that into account. And it was something I wasn't used to.
Right.
Someone would give a very thoughtful critique of someone else's work, and then another person who would just be like, I don't see enough people of color in this. And it's like, well, okay, this is a 19th century period piece. Like, I don't know what you're expecting here.
Right.
Or like, this is like, this is supposed to be a retrospective on something that happened in like 1851. I'm really not sure that you can like insert what you want in there, like, or provide the kind of perspective that you'd like. You saw a lot of things like that. I think a lot of people enjoyed critiquing sometimes more than they enjoyed writing, which I understand. It was actually fun. It was like a fun rap session and stuff like that. But I also do think that not everyone, people either didn't give people equal criticism or they were afraid to critique other people's pieces.
Right.
And I think that like outside of workshop, you couldn't write a piece like Otessa. Like you couldn't do something that would have anything that might, trigger someone's sensibilities, not because they wouldn't get past the instructor, but you never know who you set off in workshop, and they'd say things that you outside of work. Yeah, it was just, I don't know. I think that there are lots of good things that come from it, and I think everyone should, there are lots of like great benefits from workshopping. I think everyone who writes should have that benefit, or have that experience. But I just hope that culture has gotten better now. This is when you write, it shouldn't be about your preferences or your feelings. When you look at someone's writing and you don't like the subject, it doesn't matter. Look at their prose, look at how they present it. It felt like a lot of people were forgetting that very crucial aspect that really serves you well in editing.
Yeah, and I think another thing that happens with workshops in that regard is even if there's somebody that nobody likes, if there's like they're just like the outcast of the cohort, or whatever. I've seen like even instructors, they'll just dig into this person a little bit because they're just like, you know what I mean? And I mean, that is part of it. Like there is like it's a vulnerability. You're opening yourself up to it. And I think a lot of places they try to put this kind of etiquette and well-meaning rules around how you interact when critiquing something. And I just mean it's standards expected. Like I had a really good instructor in grad school, and she would always, when somebody was going off and they were saying some bullshit, like she would just step in and be like, what would you suggest they do? What would you suggest they do to fix it? Like, you're not allowed to just go off. Oh, it's terrible, blah, it's boring. She'd be like, no, you need to give us constructive criticism. And then when the person didn't have anything to offer, she would just shut them down. All right, well, you're done talking. Next,
God, yeah.
Yeah, and that's really, you need that when you have all these different people clashing in a room over things that they're probably pretty sensitive about. Just hold everybody to a standard like that, and it solves so many problems. But I know that it's weird, right? Like they're kind of talking about it outside, right? The Fight Club rules don't ever talk about workshop. But when I was in my MFA, I mean, that's all we talked about. That is all we talked about all the time.
You also were in a more isolated, what else was there to talk about? I feel like I had people just like, I remember talking to one person. She was like, oh my God, I'm going to be so late. I'm going to miss my train. And I'm thinking, okay, like maybe she's going back into the city. Maybe she's going somewhere nearby. Oh no, it's like a 2-hour train ride, like upstate. And if she missed that train, she was screwed. She would have to take $100 Uber to like get to her car parked at the station.
Right.
So there were like, for every person who is full residency or like in the area, you have people like that. And I feel like, people try to be very sensitive, not only to people like that who, may have not had all the time in the world to work on their pieces. But I think, when you sign up for this, you're making a commitment. Like you're walking into this, like, what's expected of you. I don't think that you should, like everyone, like things happen, like everyone has issues keeping up, but like you have to fully participate. You can't just like let certain circumstances keep you from that.
If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, JerkShop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard. Yeah. And I always say, like, it's always, obviously we're here to have fun listeners and talk about workshops and experiences and other people's experience in them and all that and the writing world. But I always try to keep it a little bit positive, because it's too easy to just be negative about this stuff all the time.
Yeah.
Where it's just, I did get things out of it. I did get things out of being held to account in a workshop by my peers and an instructor and all that, and being forced to experience that. And you grow as a writer and a person and all that. So there's always those positives too. Yeah. And yeah, you never know who you're in the room with. Any stories from, your workshop, either like, something that happened to you or a friend of yours, or something you witnessed in the room that, a ridiculous blow up or something over, an accusation, or, the whole workshop gets derailed?
That has happened a couple of times, and I'm just, I can't do it. Like, what happens in workshop stays in workshop. Even years later, I seriously feel that bad. I don't want to share like anything salacious or anything. Oh God, I'm gonna have to think like what I could maybe put out there that I would feel okay putting out there.
But it's interesting because it doesn't even matter, right? Like, because everybody that's
no,
sat in
it
a
doesn't
room
matter at all.
knows.
No,
they know exactly what you're talking about. They know, because I was in my MFA around the same time, 2016, when I started, and it was right before everything hit the fan with the 2016 election, and there was a huge shift, and everybody knows it. If you've sat in a workshop in like the last 10 years, there's been this kind of politics bleeding into the workshop, and then all of a sudden it became the only metric that mattered for a while, and hopefully it's going away now.
Yeah.
I don't know. Although I've talked to some MFA grads as recently as like 2021-ish, they graduated, and it hasn't changed pretty much from that since we were there, doing our thing.
I will say this, and I feel like I can like cloak it enough obscurity where like nobody would, but I think so. Where we were located, we were in the middle of an area that like we were very close to a historically working class city. And a lot of the original population is still there. And some of the undergrad faculty members started, putting together classes for people in the writing department, the undergrad writing department, to like go explore that city, to kind of interact with people there. But on the grad level, someone was like, I really would like to, do a series of interviews and like maybe put together like a sheaf of them. And I want to talk to some of these like longtime legacy residents about the changes in our hometown, and tie it into the election, because that area went straight for Trump,
Right.
or like pretty close. Yeah, and so, but of course that got shut. Like I never knew what became of that idea, because he brought it up the once. He never brought any interviews or work related to that. I have to wonder if someone just told him not to do it.
Right.
I've
had
you saw that a lot, like anyone who kind of any subject that was like maybe like like you kind of were discouraged from pursuing.
I've had several emails now from listeners that have mentioned something similar, where they reach out to me and tell me what they saw with something like that. And I had recently, I did this on a bonus episode, listeners. You have to subscribe to listen. So patreon.com/heavyboard. But where they wrote me in and they just said, yeah, they watched that happen where this, peer of theirs was writing a novel, had a good kind of an idea for a novel, but he was a straight white guy, and he had an
Oh
idea for a
gosh.
novel about a Negro League baseball team, and like kind of very interesting idea the way she described it, like write about this great kind of historical fiction plan, and he was just discouraged from it, because he just like, well, you're a straight white guy, you're not going to be able to write about this, and you know is the world, is it the end of the world? No, but it is also like, the world probably would have been better off if this person wrote that book or whatever, like
Right.
you never know. And yeah, I mean, that's happening a lot. I think it's the reason I started this segment too is because I was getting emails from people when the people started reaching out to me with stories like this. I was like, okay, so I'm not crazy, I'm not making it up,
Oh
I'm
no,
not
you are not.
exaggerating. Yeah, like
I'm trying to. Okay, so another thing that did happen is I had an amazing advisor, and he was Korean, of Korean descent, even though he was a Canadian citizen, and he was the very one. This is one of like the very first teaching jobs I think outside of Canada that he had, and he showed us like this video of obviously like an American journalist or an American nonfiction writer going over to Korea and taking one of their cultural customs and like doing some sort of like a creative spin on it.
right.
And yet showing like, and he showed like the video showed like the residents just appreciating the guy, like, hey, that's really cool. Um, he turned it off, and I forgot. Like, it's all so blurry now. It was supposed to be a prompt for like some of our own work, and immediately it was just like, what is that white guy doing presenting another person's culture?
Right.
Why were they okay with that? Like, why was everyone just like so ecstatic to like see his spin on this certain custom? This doesn't seem okay. Like, he's making money off of these people. I bet they didn't get paid shit. Like, it just like it just turned into that. And like, I don't know, after a while, I started thinking that it was like yeah, sorry. Thanks. Yeah, sorry.
No, you're good. You're good.
Sorry. Delivery guy.
No, you're good. You're good.
Yeah. What was I saying before? Apologies.
No,
Oh yes, I think a lot of what happened. So people talk a lot about imposter syndrome, not just in the writing world, but just like in any industry, in any setting. I think a lot of the people who tried to derail workshop or gave these critiques that were completely off base they were kind of maybe trying to take the focus off of themselves,
right.
or maybe even like their envy of like someone's really great piece. Like they couldn't bring themselves to say something good about a piece whose subject matter they didn't like. So the only thing they could do, or maybe they were unprepared, like you never
Right.
know, but that was like a surefire way to kind of just get things off track. And you saw that happen a lot where this was the one reliable thing that you could say and like bullshit your way through while maybe like putting someone else down. So you could always give kind of like a narrow cultural critique of the work.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that is a underestimated reason as to why this got as kind of crazy as it did with it, politics infiltrating the MFA and the writing world and really everything now too. It's social media, but I think it also is because it's easier to make a cultural critique like from that angle than it is to critique something like a structural writing craft angle. It's much easier to critique it from this
Yes.
large cultural, oh well, this kind of vague reference to black people or Asian people or whatever it is, like just kind of a vague reference to this monolithic group, and then it's like, oh well, you're saying something profound, but like you're not actually, like you're not actually talking about the piece, you're talking about the larger cultural world right now, like it distracts and people conflate the two, and I think that's a source of a huge issue with that. Yeah. But that's what I mean. I'm getting more and more people. Maybe it's just I have more people listening, but they're reaching out with their stories, and I really appreciate that, listeners. So yeah, if you have something to share, send that in, heavyboardpodcast@gmail.com. And I had a few questions about what you've seen as just like an editor. And as we said, listeners, Sam is like a kind of in the not, I don't want to say news, but in like the nonfiction cultural commentary editing
Yes.
world. And what have you noticed, say, over like the last 5 years in terms of like a change, a shift? And we talked a little bit about the technological shift, the economic shift, but like the business model shift, and I guess like the cultural shifts. Like what have you noticed or seen, just as an editor working and freelancing in that world?
So one thing that like this stuck in my mind, and I don't know why it did because I'm sure this is a common occurrence. I went on a job interview in late 20, no, yeah, no, early 2020, right before the pandemic. And it was for just news editing. I'd just be reading and news items that would go out in a briefing every day. And it was right near it was a bipartisan company. Like basically, at one point they provided services to the White House. It was just editing a news briefing that goes out to certain corporations or like certain branches of government every day. So what my interviewer was talking, and he's like, like how do you feel about? He basically implied that I would have to edit copy I disagreed with. I was like, okay, this is odd. Like it's not. Why does this have to be brought up? And he's
Right.
like, if you believe strongly in the Democratic Party, for instance, then you might be reading some things that you might not find to be correct. But it was like, why are you giving me this this explainer about how editing news works? Of course, I'm not going to love everything I edit. That's not the point of this. But you start seeing that more and more and more. Like I've experienced that more and more and more, where it's there is a Facebook group, and it's kind of notorious for female writers and editors. And at one point in 2020, this poor woman, and she was a woman of color, this poor woman, it was like, okay, guys, like, I actually do copy editing for Fox, and it pays really well, but I'm taking a new job, and like, DM me if you want a reference. Here's the page. Here's here's your compensation. And the group just exploded. Just, right. Its own like moderator. That's how I got one of my first jobs. Its own moderator ended up like posting about the fallout on Twitter, and it was just absolutely insane. Like a lot of these, like this entire group that was supposed to just be like women helping each other. It was never supposed to be partisan. Went after this poor woman, like calling her a white supremacist. The entire group, like by the very end of it, like all the admins for the groups, like because this group expanded over time. Like there was a group for editors, there was a group for content writers, there was a group for literary fiction, there was a group for like just like for anything, like people who were on the business side of publishing more. All the leadership in those groups had to be switched out. The head administrator was like, hey, listen, if you're not posting about jobs and compensation, like, you need to get out. Like, this isn't a place for your political rants. And, right. Before I never really noticed because I just used it as a job board. But yeah, some of the like admins of these pages, it was like post on post like about political events every day. And like, it was supposed to, like, some people maybe like vent about clients they had or like a day at work, but you just, I've been seeing that more and more, and right. I know that it happens in news organizations. Even if I'm not there, people feel like they aren't seeing copy as just copy. They're not really right. seeing their job as just a job. They see themselves as cultural stewards, and that's not good.
Right, and it leads to a lot of. One thing that people leave out of all these kind of blow-ups that have been happening over like the last 5-8 years, it's just how unprofessional it is. Like just how how unprofessional that behavior is. That if you're going off, we all have bad days, sure, but if you're like going off and going hard, trying to get people to lose jobs, calling these people white supremacists and names and things like that, horrible career-ending names, like those types of labels can ruin your life, even if they're not true.
Oh yeah.
If they're just put on you, and like it just. It's just how unprofessional it is. And like you said, it's because they're convinced that this is this kind of cultural steward, or that their contribution is going to make a difference or something. If they just, I don't know, like, but we live in that world now where you're having conversations. Well, everybody needs to know your political affiliations before the conversation, after the conversation, and you're judged according to those and not what was said in the conversation or the work you put out or anything like that.
For sure.
And what you're describing, and the reason I asked that question is because I know, like, this is happening in almost every field. I know I listen to Blocked and Reported, Jesse Singal and Katie Herzog's thing. I love them. Shout out. And They did a great thing on, I forget his name, but he was basically like a writer. I forget his name, and he was American, but he was, Filipino descent or whatever. And he had a book published, and Jesse did a great thing on it, where did an in-depth coverage. He wrote this book, but I guess the main characters were black. And he basically just describes what he was put through during the publishing process, and they never ended up publishing the book with like a big five
Oh my
publisher.
God.
But just what he was put through. Like, he was basically subjected to all of these, do you really have authority to write this? And then he got defensive, where he was like trying to explain why he has authority to write this. And then of course that looked bad. And then like, and they ended up not even publishing the book. So here we have this minority, technically, writer writing a novel. We want more voices. We want more diverse, but now we can't publish it because of this other political thing. So we're like hurting the cause that we were trying to help by doing all this. And it's really ridiculous and absurd. And everybody's looking around feeling it. And that's why I'm glad you brought it up, where like politics
but nobody
is the
can
tension.
say anything.
Right. It is
Nobody
the
can
source
say
of tension.
anything. Yeah.
Yeah. Everywhere.
It's not even just that. It's like, I think so many of these like older people, they want to stay relevant, or they're afraid. You have senior editors who are afraid of their junior staff. And every single time I hear a story like that, I'm like, what are you so afraid of? What's going to happen? But then I think about the last couple of years, and it's like, oh yeah, you can totally fabricate like a false allegation. You can do something to punish somebody. I think that, a lot of things change what's like good and bad. Like, I think the unions at some of these places are stronger. Like HarperCollins is one of the only places in the Big Five that has a union now. Or it's the only member of the Big Five, that has a union. And I think like Insider unionized, businesses Insider unionized in 2018. So it's like, it's good that that's happening, but it's bad that it's not being used to negotiate worker conditions or anything like that, really. It's like, they'll negotiate wages, but then they have to like put a splash of this in there. Like, oh yeah, also like, you can't make me edit this book that talks about gender. Like, yes the fuck you can. That's your job.
Right.
Like, there are millions of people who would take that job from you because there are so many aspirant writers, so many aspirant editors, and you're saying that you're unable to do the job that was laid out for you. That's a huge insult to
the profession.
I'm not going to go down that route. To the profession, to the education you had, to like the ethos of the industry. It's just not great.
And you're stuck. So now you're well, not only is it unprofessional, now you're using that to I mean, it has long-term effects too, where now the publisher is going to have a hard time publishing this, because now if all their junior staffers are revolting against them in some way, well, like, it's easier to just put that away than it is to fight and have a headache for a month, because you have to have all these meetings and blah blah blah. And yeah, that's where I guess I'll move to this question. Why do you think that this politics, or how, your theories on it, I'm not asking for a definitive answer, but how politics became this kind of focal point in the culture, particularly around these kind of fields like editing, writing, publishing? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think it's kind of controversial, like my theory about it, I think you might know this a little bit, like from when we've chatted in the past, but I think that there is a bit of, I think, Turchin's elite overproduction theory is somewhat correct to a certain point. I'd say that in the 2010s, like the early 2010s, like people were blogging in the 2000s. There was a lot of DIY stuff happening in the 2000s, but in the 2010s, or maybe right during Obama's first term, you had an explosion in bloggers. A lot of people who like discovered this new way to get their thoughts out there and kind of like circumvent or skirt like the mainstream way to getting exposure. But what's odd is like a lot of the successful people, like the people who really came out of there like smelling like roses, a lot of them were great photographers. They were wonderful at SEO. They were great marketers, but they weren't exactly great writers. But then they also had published books, like they had book deals and whatnot. And then, on the other side, you have a lot of these people who always dreamed of being writers, but they never were really readers, or a lot of what they read was fan fiction, or it was something that was very elementary or black and white. I know that in workshop, and mind you, like, this is a creative nonfiction workshop, you had a lot of people in there who grew up on fantasy, were like weaned on fantasy. And I have nothing against fantasy as a genre, But I think that if you are someone who primarily reads fantasy, like grew up on DeviantArt, grew up reading fan fiction, then what you want out of a book is going to be completely different. And a lot of those people kind of like are looking for that like sort of fandom angle, like that black and white, like, you know, one character is always a hero, one character is always a villain angle. They're looking for that now in everything, not just books, not just fiction, but also political copy, also news copy, and people know that impulse and want to milk it. So I'd say that that's like a big part of it. Like it's mainly a lot of people who want to get into this, and you know, a lot of us a lot of people who shouldn't be. Like I, in a way, I don't even think I should be. Like sometimes I like wake up some days and I'm just like, am I really like? You have to really like, you know. I wouldn't say you have to have a sense of entitlement, but you have to really believe in your own abilities. And you have to kind of like you have to set the right conditions for you to work each day. Like freelance is not easy. And you also have to kind of like keep up hope. I think like there are a lot of people who are paid up who are like live in fear of being cut, of like having to go through a job search again and like not finding anything. It's a small pool, like not everyone makes it. So I think that's like all of this is, you know, adding, like it's exacerbating things. I like politics is kind of used as a weed out. It's used as a tool to kind of mask resentment, where it's like, oh, I don't hate that guy because, you know, he has connections and he made it. I hate him because he has shitty politics, right. You know, stuff like that. And then there's also like on top of all of that, there's this group of people who maybe they were readers, but they were reading a different kind of book. They weren't reading the kind of copy that they now edit. They were never really into like they kind of were like weaned on fan fiction, weaned on DeviantArt, weaned on romance novels, and they now want to, you know, even though they're editors, they want to write the book. They want to switch the copy over and like make it what they are used to.
Right. And I think that's the motivation for some of that. I always bring it up, but like, you know, the kind of Roald Dahl rewriting, the Agatha Christie, the Ian Fleming. I think that is where they're hiring these kind of 20-something editors, you know, for low 5 figures. I'm sure it's not more than that.
Nothing. Yeah.
To rewrite these masterpieces by some of the greatest writers that we've ever known. And it's motivated by that, where like they think that they're actually entitled to change it because the culture has changed, or because the politics have changed, or, you know, like it just... It's a level of I don't want to say insecurity, but it is kind of a way to, like you said, get the lens off of you and put it on someone else. So now you're the editor.
Oh, yeah.
So you have a certain job to do, and if you're not very good at that job or whatever, well then you can mask the fact that you're not very good at it by focusing on these other things like politics or something that's easier and just presented to you on the timeline every day when you're scrolling, and then you can just kind of form it around there. If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, JerkShop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard. And then, of course, social media, I guess, has a big impact on this. Like you said, around 2016 is when you were getting into the professional side of it, right? Like the MFA and the workshops and the...
Later than that, but yeah, that part, yes. Yeah, I was like, no, much later, but yes. I don't know. I also do think that, I think, so the author Wesley Yang had said this recently, and I think he's right.
Oh, I love
that
Yang,
sometimes, I do too, that sometimes he'll be reading an article or he'll click on an article and just, you know, shut out of that screen after he comes over, like, across a bad sentence. And, after 2008, a lot of places downsized on their editing departments. And he's like, now we see what this was for. Like, and you even see it with a lot of independent writers. And I think that's why I've had some, like, success, is that people are realizing, like, okay, I do need someone by my side to curb my impulses. Right. It's not easy to read and self-edit your own copy. It's it's hard.
Right.
So, Yang has said it. He's like, a lot of these places, that used to have people like entire departments dedicated to making this copy right and like ensuring that everyone had like that it was quality. All of that is gone. It's gutted because it's all about clicks now, or it's all about a model that's about to go out of business. And I think, that's starting to kind of apply to book publishing too. Like, there's a reason why people are downsizing their editing departments, but then I wonder if it's just because, like, I really can't tell you much about the sensitivity readers. I wonder if it's because they feel bad leaving, aspirant 20-somethings out in the cold with no job, so they have to, like, make up jobs. Like, I honestly have no idea what's going on there. But
yeah, that actually leads me to a question with when you mentioned the business model and kind of this. Is the publishing industry dying? And I mean that in the kind of broadest possible sense. I know it's like a meme and people talk about it all the time, and some people will cheer for it to die, right? Some people are cheering for it, but
I'm not in book publishing, like, so I don't know if I can answer that right. But this is what I think. I don't think it's dying, or I think that it can reverse itself. And we see it now with like my year of rest and relaxation. If they just start focusing on quality books, even that like Lit It Girl article, if they just start using different techniques and maybe reversing what they did over the past 10 years, I think it can save itself. I think, the store McNally Jackson in New York, I've been going there for years and years and years. I remember when I opened in 2007 and like it was close to my dad's house and I would walk. I think that the reason for her success, Sarah McNally's, and she said it, is that she focuses on readers. It was never going to, like, of course there are like, trinkets and cool stationery and stuff. It was never going to be a bookstore that was not for readers.
Right.
She was all like, she always ordered from certain publishers, ones that had like the most, like, she always made sure to have a wide selection. She didn't always have bestsellers. She was always very choosy with what she chose to sell. So I think that's, you have to apply that to the publishing houses. It has like, I'm sorry guys, you're going to have to start printing what people want to read,
right.
And this is not just like your, especially the small presses that are DIY. This isn't just like your vehicle for validation. You've got to like, we've already read this piece about white guys. Like I've been reading it like the same one over and over for about 10 years. Like
right.
we've got to get off of this now and publish something that I know you have in you, something innovative, something fresh, something fun that will get people excited about books again. I think it can be done.
I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. And we've chatted about this. And one of my motivations for starting this podcast and why the regular episodes, we do these JerkShops, but the regular ones, we do books and have like fun book chats about them. And because I think it can be done. It can be done if we have this is broader, not just books, but you and I chat about cultural stuff all the time. And it's just like,
we do.
It feels like there's a death attitude about almost everything right now. Like everybody's just like, oh, well, that's over. That's dying. It's done. And I'm just like, no, and I think of like things like the Barbie, Oppenheimer, like these huge hit movies that made almost billions of dollars that we haven't had a hit movie in the summer where the whole culture was obsessed with it for like a couple months in a while. But it didn't go away. Like it's still there. You just have to put out something that people want to go see or want to pay money for and market it accordingly. And you see this stuff with the books, like, yeah, book sales are down. And there was that huge shift to kind of the political nonfiction market because that was the biggest market after the YA kind of collapsed and dried up. And I understand that, you're running an industry, you have to chase that. But then it's like, all right, now the culture is shifting again. And people want something a little different. They want something like Otessa. They want something a little raunchier, a little raw, a little more honest about all this stuff. And yeah, I think it can be revived.
They don't want to be babied. I don't think, I think after there's a certain subset, I think, of millennials, like people our age, and you see it. My friend's husband makes this remark all the time, and it never fails to crack me up, that every bookstore in my area where I live it has this like very infantilized aesthetic. Like you walk in, the first thing you see, it's not books. You see like plushies. You know, you see trinkets, you see like you know what he's like, you know, they're RBG gift stores. I'm like, oh
Right.
my god, you're right. He's like, you know, like, and that's how he refers to them. And he's just like, there's like another RBG gift store like down the block,
Right.
and that's true. Especially after she died, you go, and I'm like, okay, so all right. You know, I love Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but we got this pillow here, we got this plushie. I don't know, like I feel like that's kind of disrespectful to have. Where are the books? You know, like, could we
Right.
get to the
Yeah.
books, please? That's what a lot of, and then like you get to the stock, and like all these places, a lot of them have the same stock, and it's either political nonfiction, like you said, or it's YA, or it's, you know, like you don't see great literary fiction that much anymore.
Yeah.
And the books that are promoted, I think Otessa is kind of, you know, an exception. I remember reading what was like, I think Samantha Irby is another exception. Like she's writing stuff that is raw and it's funny and it's, you know, like she doesn't try to fit herself into any box. But, you know, aside from like those two women, or maybe Sally Rooney, I remember going to the bookstore in 2020. I was so excited, like it finally opened. I was in quarantine. And the book that was being promoted at the time was Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed. And it was like, she's going to be the new hope for literary fiction. I read this, was like, what? No, what is this? There were obvious reasons for you to promote this, and we know why. It was not out of excellence. I don't care if she went to Iowa. What is this? If you
Right.
wanted to find diverse voices, like there's so many wonderful female Black writers, and why is it does this have to be like forced on everybody when
Right.
there's so many wonderful like literary writers out there, like, you know, of color, of different, like it's
Right.
crazy.
Yeah. We live in the best time in the world to be able to find diverse voices all over the country, you know, like
Yes.
there's a lot of people pretending that it's like 1968 or whatever, and we just finished, like, you know, ending segregation or something. It's like, no, like we've had decades of intermarrying, intermingling, migration, like immigration. And look at what we have, this great culture that we can, it's very rich. You have all these perspectives. It should be easy to find great writers from all over the place, you know, and I think you're right. I like that you're positive about it too, that it can be done. Like it can, with a little bit of work, a little bit of motivation, a little bit of determination, and taste, maybe a little bit of
And
taste.
taste.
Yeah. We can.
There are so many people
Yeah.
with great, like with discerning taste, and I think they're just waiting to come together and form. Like, yeah, you can see it. They're
Yeah.
wonderful. Like, you know, like you can see it kind of starting to form and emerge. It
And you
can be
have
done.
to, yeah. And I
Yeah.
recently I was listening to something and they talked about this, where they just said, you know, it does feel like the last 10 years, 15 years, that we have just been unable to have honest conversations, honest, serious conversations about art, books, play, you know,
Right.
whatever's coming out, movies, that we just, there's this tension, that political kind of, usually, yes, woke kind of politics coming in and strangling everybody, so that we can't even talk. It's hard to even talk with your friends a lot of times about this stuff, because
Yeah.
there's this tension that is like coming from outside the room, that is like all existing on the timeline, that everybody's scrolling constantly, and then it just kind of, everybody's feeling that. And I think we are reaching an apex where everyone's starting to get really sick of that, where it's like, okay, like especially those of us that know what it was like before this, where you can look back and say, you know what, this didn't used to be the way that I could sit down at a dinner with friends or whatever, get some coffees, and we could chat for hours, and it didn't matter. We
Yeah.
would laugh, you talk about any type of dynamic you want, and there wasn't this judgmental aspect to it. And I think we're starting to see that pushed back on, to the point where, yeah, I think there's reason to be hopeful, even though we're negative on this podcast and we talk about the issues, blah, blah, blah. There's plenty of reason to be hopeful for what we can do here. And I think even some of the, you know, the presses are slow, especially the big five, right? That's a big ship to turn in the water when the tide's changing. You know, it takes a little while
I do
to
think
shift.
it's coming,
Yeah.
though. I think
But
it's
yeah,
like,
exactly,
yeah.
it is. Yeah, it's coming.
Yeah, and if you look at like some of the imprints, like Broadside Books and HarperCollins, like the head of that, like, or like I think one of the senior editors is a libertarian and a civil libertarian. Like he does not, you know, he doesn't. There was a recent call to pull a book from being published. He did not listen. It did not faze him. And I don't know. I think like when I saw that happening, and like also like when I read it, I was like, happy. Oh my God, he's holding firm. And he did that over and over again. It didn't,
Right.
like, it's true that he mainly will publish like conservative books, but he also publishes liberal political books. And,
Right.
you know, every time like either side comes and is like, you need to pull this book, he doesn't move at all.
Right.
He's not afraid of anyone. And that's a huge improvement to at least have like one person like that who stands up for free speech, stands up for the culture.
And it goes away. It does work. Listen, like it does go like after, okay, you have 24-hour period where everybody's screaming at you, and then that moves on. Like the 24-hour cycles now are so quick. Like you just you'll be
I
forgotten
think
about.
people are just
Yeah.
like, it's supposed, a lot of people say it's supposed to be a feedback loop, and I do kind of agree with that, especially in editing and publishing, because like I said, there are only so many roles, there are so many aspirants,
Right.
there are lots of people who have different visions of like, what the job should be, but I think everyone is getting worn out.
Which is the best positive way we can go with it. Like it just wear itself out. And then we have, yeah, the tastemakers. And I think there's even been, it's been so hostile to people that are confident in their taste and aesthetic too. Like it's even been hostile to you if you have a confident taste. Like even so, like most of the shit that I would get is because I'm very confident in my taste and aesthetic. And when you're confident and you argue for that, people just take that as like as an aggressive kind of movement, like
Yes.
position against them, and they just don't like it. Whereas like, you know, there's just like that matters, and it is like you need people at those levels of like a high ranking editorial level in a publishing house or a newsroom or something to put their foot down and just be, no, I have confidence in our taste and aesthetic here, and we were doing, you know, a broad range of things, and this fits well within it. And you see it. Well, those people are getting more clicks now. You know, Barry Weiss starting her free press. Well, that's growing rapidly because they're just
That
doing
like
that.
that's yeah. She was one of the people, I think, like when I started doing a lot of Substack work, you know, a lot of people thought that Barry would flop. A lot of people, and like now she's outpacing the people who wanted her out at New York Times. She's not only is she outpacing them, like she's probably like she's bringing back the old model. I saw her numbers recently. I was very impressed. I forgot what they were, but you see that with Substack. Like you see people who are charging $8 a month to read like people's one-off political takes, but they're well-written takes, and they're from someone who they've been reading for years. So they'll be like, yeah, I'll cough up $8 a month, and then they'll quickly, you know, get to 100,000 subscribers, like Matt Iglesias.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. Like it's same with the movies. That's why I brought up Barbie and stuff, because like the old model is still there. Like
people will want to pay for quality. All these national outlets are bought by Gannett, and like they're barely charging anything. I still don't want to pay. Like I subscribe to the Tennessean for work for one of my clients. I still don't want to pay for it. Like I would pay $8 a month. I'd pay $20 a month for things that I know are going to be of quality, something I enjoy reading every day. And I think that's what people are starting to learn. You've got to serve readers.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what people maybe are confusing. And I'm going off here, but it's just like, we keep saying that like the tech changed everything, like the tech ruined the business model and stuff like that. I mean, like, we just haven't adapted to it yet. Like we just haven't changed up. Because like, you saw the streaming wars that we lived through with all these studios developing their streaming services that really ramped up during COVID. And now they're all retreating. They're all selling off like their IP because it's not a profitable business model to just stream hours and hours of content all the time. It's more profitable to do a serious marketing campaign on a good product that people like and make money off the box office. Like that's how it's always worked. Like on these movies and stuff and TV shows, commercials, ads, that's what makes the money. It isn't like, and they're like eliminated all that they just eliminated all the revenue generating like apparatuses and then said, oh, it's dying, it changed. It's like, well, no, we just literally eliminated the way you would make money with this instead of how it always worked. And people aren't reading print newspapers or print magazines. I get that. But I think people also...
I think they are. Specialty ones, yeah.
They're comparing it to that time, like that kind of 80s and 90s, like where they're comparing it to this kind of time where anybody could start a magazine and it could probably make money. You know, you could be the most niche thing in the world at that time, you know, whatever, ham radio magazine or something for people that do, you know, just a weird thing, and it could have enough subscribers to support it. And that time went away. So it's like, you know, now it just can't be just everything that goes. It has to be a serious product with an audience that you can find or build. And I always say that too, like people that think that nobody's going to listen to you or you're scared. Well, don't be afraid. You have people like me out there, people like Sam. Like there are people that understand what you're saying, what you're trying to do, that feel the same way. And like, no, you know, we can get out of it. Yeah, we can get out of it together in a way. Yeah.
I mean, this kind of goes against what you were just saying, but I think gatekeeping is good. I'm the kind of person who will say you should always, you should always try, like, you should get out there and write, you should do your best. But then also the thing about what happened with the blogging boom, that what happened maybe for 15 years, is that the sad truth is not everybody can do it.
Right.
Building an audience is a special skill, but that's not the same skill as editing. That's not the same skill as writing. You need a team. It's not specialization is good. You can't be everything at once. I think, like I said, that's what a lot of these independent journalists are starting to learn right now. Like, wait a minute, I did need somebody to hold me back. So I think that that's also a part of serving the reader. We're now kind of transitioning out of scrolling through the news while you're on the toilet at the airport. I think people are trying to be more intentional about their habits. They're trying to be more intentional about what they read, and they expect good copy. So I think for anyone who's going to try and become an editor, there are going to be opportunities available, but you have to know your stuff and show your work.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Sam, this has been fucking fantastic. It's been a great time. Any final thoughts on editing, MFAs, publishing?
No, I think we covered it all.
We did it. We fixed it. Yeah, we solved it. Actually, yeah, all of it.
We did it. Yeah.
All right, that's all I had. Yeah, thanks again for doing this, Sam.
Of course. Thanks for having me on.
We're gonna have to have you back soon. Yeah.
Oh gosh.
All right, listeners, this has been another episode of Heavy Board presents JerkShop.
Heavy.
Board.
Heavy.
I am heavy
Board.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No!
Resources.
Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so. Are you radioactive now?
Inner.
Resources. American resources.
Being bored?
Some activities are intentional, right?
It shows such a lack
Heavy.
of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom,
Heavy.
I should say.
Bored. Heavy.
I am heavy
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.